Hi, this is Adam Elio Berkowitz from Israel 365 News. I'm here today, one of my favorite speakers, Dr. Mordechai Kedar. Dr. Kedar is a senior lecturer at Bar Ilan University is it Arabic Studies?
At the Department of Arabic Studies.
The Department of Arabic Studies. And I have seen him on Al Jazeera debating imams in Arabic. He's a speaker of truth who's not afraid of anything. And I respect that enormously. So Dr. Kedar, he's going to be speaking to me today about the state of Israel as a miracle, as a miraculous manifestation of God's will. So Dr. Kedar, first of all, tell me, how do you see Israel as a miracle? How is it defined as a miracle?
Well, for this, we have to define a miracle first, or to explain what miracle is. Miracle, I think, is some kind of event or happening which is totally impossible. Means that people view it as something which cannot happen. It cannot be there, and it happens. If the chances for something to happen are zero, and it happens, this is one of the characteristics of a miracle. If it is being done by God, it's a miracle done by God. If it is done by people, it is a miracle which is done by God through the means of people. Means they actually execute it on the ground, yet without the divine blessing, it couldn't happen.
So you're saying people can do the impossible, and it's a miracle. B'ezrat Hashem, God willing.
When people do something which is formally viewed as totally impossible, this might very possibly be a miracle which God performs through his servants. So this is how I look at the state of Israel. Because if you look at the situation of the Jewish people in the 19th century, nobody with right mind would think even that these people can make a state on their forefathers' land. And both things means that there will be a people, means a nation, and on their forefathers' land. But for this, to understand the situation of the Jewish people at that time, I'm talking about something like 140 years, 130 years ago, more or less. There was no Jewish nation. There were Jewish communities which struggled to survive everywhere where they were. In Germany, in Russia, in Ukraine, in Morocco, in Yemen, even in America, life was not easy those days. So wherever Jews lived, they lived as a community, local community. One of the communities which lived in that place struggled to survive, either financially or against all kinds of haters, Jew haters, which we saw through history. And it was the Khmelnytsky in Poland, it was the Tsars in Russia. These were all kinds of imams in the Arab and the Islamic world which tried to convert Jews by force to Islam. It happened in Mashhad, in Persia. It happened also in Morocco in some places. So everywhere there was a Jewish community which struggled to survive. Okay, they knew theoretically about the land of Israel. They knew the direction more or less because this was the direction of their prayer. And they mentioned, Jerusalem and the land of Israel every day. They mentioned it as a kind of a dream, as kind of some hallucination about the land of Israel, which nobody really was there and nobody came back because visiting Israel was a long way and very dangerous way in many cases. And people knew theoretically about Eretz Israel, about the land of Israel. And the other thing is that they knew very little about each other. Means communities couldn't communicate with each other in many cases, especially because of difference of language. Because communities which lived in the Arab world spoke in Arabic. Those who lived in Europe spoke Yiddish, which is a German dialect. Those who lived in Spanish-speaking countries spoke Ladino. So communities, in between these three areas, could not even correspond with each other. And the Yemenite community, for example, did not even know that there are other Jewish communities in other countries in the world, except for Egypt, maybe because they had some connection with Maimonides 1,000 years ago.
Dr. Kedar, I'm sorry to interrupt, but you're actually making your point even stronger than I thought you would. If you want to say something is impossible, it's usually because the conditions aren't there or the laws of nature go against it. What you're saying is not only did the laws of nature in so many ways go against Israel, and not only did the conditions not exist, but the will of the people and the people themselves were not ready for it. It's not like they
Not at
said,
all.
I'll do something impossible and it'll work. They didn't even want to do the impossible.
They thought that it was something what we call in Hebrew, Hilchata leMeshicha. We will have to wait until Messiah comes and collects us all to the land of Israel. This was the belief, and this was what people thought, that we are here doomed to live in exile until the days of the redemption. And only when Messiah comes back, the Jewish Messiah comes back, only then he will bring us all to the land of Israel. Otherwise, we are doomed to live in exile forever. This is what people felt. Not only this, it was actually reinforced by the alleged Agadah, means the Midrash, which said that the Jews are not allowed to go up the wall, the city wall, as a kind of a metaphor
that's
of the land of Israel.
The four oaths by the Satmar Hasidic
Right,
sect.
right, the oath. Right. So, not only this, Jews with the time, especially after the emancipation, became more and more part of the societies where they lived. First of all, they started the era of the Enlightenment, means studying, learning, becoming doctors, becoming philosophers, becoming lawyers, becoming accountants, violin players. All these, they became immersed in the communities around them. They became leaders of, communism, socialism, all kinds of isms which were in those societies. And the people in Germany, Jews in Germany, were more than convinced that we are Germans who are part of the Mosaic community. We are not we have nothing to do with Jews in France or in Morocco or in America because we are Germans before anything else. Jews in Iraq felt the same thing because Jews in Iraq were deeply in the Iraqi economy since Iraq was established in the beginning of the 20th century, and there they never thought even about moving to the land of Israel. Don't forget that the Jews in Iraq live in Iraq way before the Islam came to Iraq in the 7th century, because they are there for who knows how many thousands of years. Jews in Yemen live there at least for 3,000 years since the days of Solomon. So Jews in most cases felt that they are in an indivisible part of the societies where they live. So when those who came with a Zionist idea actually were faced by two kinds of of objection from the ultra-Orthodox, ultra-religious Jews who believe that we are doomed to stay in exile until the Messiah comes and redeems us. They were against the Zionist campaign, because the Zionist movement, because they saw it as a kind of rebellion against the divine decree to stay in exile until God redeems us. So the Zionists were faced or confronted by those ultra-religious Jews, the Nature Karta, I would say. On the other side, the secular Jews, those who actually felt that they are indivisible part of the local communities, definitely they were against the Zionist movement, because what, they want to take us out from here? And what to do with us? To put us in the swamps of the land of Israel, of the land of Palestine, which is under Turkish rule? What, are you normal to take us from these normal countries in Europe, as they were in the 19th century, and to put us under the Islamic rule of the Ottomans in Palestine or Palestina? Nobody with the right mind would even think like this. So the Zionist movement were actually opposed by Jews from both sides of the realm of the cultures which Jews had in those days, before they were confronted by others who might not have liked the Zionist idea. So here we are. They actually were fighting, or were struggling against all odds, because even the Jews did not like. Now, don't forget that in the 19th century, into the 20th century, there were some attempts to solve the Jewish problem in other places. First of all, in Birobidzhan, in Russia, Soviet Union, some part of the Soviet Union in Siberia, they allocated a land named Birobidzhan for the Jews, in order to establish there a Jewish autonomy in that place. Another attempt was in Argentina, when Baron Hirsch tried to establish Jewish settlements in Argentina, and on the land which he bought, in order to solve the Jewish problem. There were attempts to send the Zionist organization to Uganda as well, which was also another option which Britain came with when they saw that the Arabs object the whole thing here. So there were attempts to go along with the Zionist organization, but in other countries, not in Zion, means not in the land of Israel.
So if I may,
and don't forget another thing which is very important, that for Jews, in many Jews, especially in Europe, the solution of their problem was America, going to America or to Australia or to South America. But America was viewed by millions of Jews as the solution, and actually the big migration of Jews to the United States and Canada was at the end of the 19th century into the 20th century, when waves of Jewish migration went to the United States, because the United States accepted them, unlike the Turkish Ottoman Empire here in the land of Israel, until the First World War. And afterwards, the British for a short time allowed migration of Jews to the land of Israel, but later, when the Arabs started to object, Britain started to limit the Jewish migration to this country.
So I'm wondering, Dr. Kedar, you're always very logical, very fact-based. I absolutely believe you when you say Israel, if you look at the history, is impossible, and that makes it a miracle. But that would also mean that Israel is, as we see it today, as we're living in it, is the manifestation of prophecy in the Tanakh. Would you say that we are living in what the prophets predicted would happen?
You know what? Let me tell you something from my own personal experience. My wife, Raina, came on Aliyah from the United States in 1971, almost 50 years ago. Her family came beforehand in 1970, and her family included her parents, her sister and brother, and her grandparents, means the parents of her mother. The grandfather was the Chazan, the cantor, Chaim Mazovetzky, Chaim Aryeh Mazovetzky, Leon Mazovetzky, who was a Chazan in Winthrop, Massachusetts. And he went to Jerusalem, and he, with the years, became old. And it was in the 90s when I visited. He was like 90 years old already, very old. And one day we came, and he was sitting on a bench downstairs in the street, which was under his building. When we came with our children, and we came out from the car, and here we see Grandpa is sitting on the bench right in front of the car. And the kids started to run around, and we sat with him on the bench. So I asked him, Grandpa, do you like to sit on this bench? So he says, what do you mean? When I'm sitting here, this is the fulfillment of the prophecy of Zechariah in chapter 8, verse 4, which says, so said the Lord of hosts, old men and women shall yet sit in the streets of Jerusalem, each man with his staff in his hand because of old age. And the streets of the city shall be filled with boys and girls playing in its streets. And he is pointing at my kids. So he says, look, what actually we do here in the street of Beit HaKerem in Jerusalem, we are actually the fulfillment of the prophecy of Zechariah. What more do you need?
And there are grapevines in the Shomron and Samaria. We are absolutely.
So, definitely.
Wow.
But for him to sit on the bench in the street of Jerusalem was nothing but a fulfillment, a clear fulfillment, physical fulfillment of the prophecy of Zechariah. So for him, this was the whole thing.
I have a feeling that when people read the Tanakh, when they read that verse, they don't imagine the buses driving by and the parking and the they don't imagine
and the tickets.
And the tickets, and they don't imagine planes flying overhead. They don't imagine, but that's what it looks like. You're right. You're absolutely right. So I have so you described how at one point the enlightened Jews, they were wherever they were in the world, and they were attaching themselves to that. And you also described the religious Jews who were waiting for the Messiah. And I mean, there's a lot of questions about what they're waiting for. Are they waiting for a billboard? Are they waiting, that says Messiah's here, now get on the plane? Are they waiting for, an email from messiah.com? What are they waiting for? So apparently, if you think that we're living inside the prophecy, so what do you think the Messiah or the Messianic era looks like? Because this is supposed to be part of it.
Well, look at this. You can continue with the miracle. The 1948 war, the War of Independence, Israel was declared one day beforehand. Israel was declared actually in the afternoon of the 14th of May, when the mandate was finished one day later, in the 15th of May, 1948. One day later, on Sunday, May 16, 1948, 6 Arab armies, regular armies, invaded when Israel was one day old, one day only, with very limited armed forces, and, not even have a state, a state which is one day old. And Israel succeeded to survive with a giant cost of 6,000 people, which was more or less 1% of the Jewish people who lived in this country those days. But but Israel survived. This is, unbelievable. Another thing which is could be added to this thing, that the fact that Israel succeeded not only to take Jews out of exile, Israel succeeded in much harder mission to take exile out of the Jews. Means to create the new Jew here in Israel, who is not running away anymore as he did in exile, who is not living by lending money as it was in exile. He is, first of all, he's a farmer, unlike what he was in most cases in exile, and he is fighting. He knows how to fight. When Jews were soldiers, pilots, where and when? Very, very rare. Very rarely you saw Jews in any army in the Arab countries or in European countries or in other countries. Okay, Jews might have been sporadically here or there, but you never saw a Jewish army. And here all of a sudden you have to create a Jewish army. Since when Jews know how to fly airplanes?
And you had to create Jewish soldiers. You had to turn Jews into soldiers.
Right.
And we were good at it. That was the crazy thing. That was the crazy thing, is we were good at it.
To turn a yeshiva bocher into a fighter, it takes years. It needs to change his culture, to change his mindset, to change his whole worldview. And this was what was here. And this is much harder, to take exile out of the Jews and to install new culture into them. A culture of people who live by themselves, live independently, defend themselves, defend their country. So definitely this. Another part of the miracle is what happened with Hebrew, with the language. There is no precedent in the world, first of all, to communities who were scattered for 19 centuries and came back to redeem their forefathers' land. There is no precedent in the whole world that a groups of people kept their religion, kept their allegiance to their country, to their land, and returned to it 19 centuries after they were forcibly expelled from that country. This is unprecedented. Another thing which is unprecedented is the revival of the Hebrew language. The Hebrew language, along the 19 centuries of exile, was a language of the synagogue, means prayer. It was a liturgic language, which in most cases was not understood by the people. They prayed in it, they cited the prayers in it, they learned the Torah or the Talmud with this, but it was not a daily life language. It didn't serve as the daily life language. And here, all of a sudden, with the revival of the nation, Hebrew becomes, with the time, becomes the language of the garage, the language of science, the language of economy, the language of the media, the language of everything. Because here we speak Hebrew. There is no such a resurrection in the whole history of the whole world of a nation, of a language, and a returning to a land which was occupied by other forces. So this is what I mean by a miracle. Nobody in the 19th century could predict that this miracle will ever happen in real life, in the real world. And it happened. And therefore, I am more than sure that if this is not a miracle, I don't know what miracle is.
But the prophets predicted it. The prophets predicted it.
Look at what happens today. Old men and old women, the vineyards, wherever you go. It's really... exactly the fulfillment of the prophets. And now you see the peace even, which the nations around us give us. Okay, it's not the full redemption, it's not the full miracle, it's not the full fulfillment of a miracle. There are things yet to be achieved, but definitely a long way was already done. And let's hope that the future will witness the continuation of the fulfillment of this miracle.
You know, the way you said it, I asked you, you know, what are the religious people who are waiting for Mashiach? What were they waiting for? A billboard or something? This is, you know, when you make a list like you're doing, it's like, okay, this is, you know, we're here. You know, where are you? You know, line up. So I understand this is not the type of approach you take, but would you, from a cold logical perspective, would you say we're in the age of Mashiach?
What we believe is that we are in the beginning of the days of Mashiach. Look, when you look at the wars all over the world, in Yemen, in Iraq, in wherever you go, Syria, of course, what you see in other places in the world, you see tension, you see hatred, you see wars, you see bloodshed. Yet there are things to be achieved before we can describe these days as the days of Messiah, where peace will govern the whole world. Okay, so we do need some more steps to go to the Messiah. But for us, the returning to Zion and the reestablishment of the Jewish independent life on our forefathers' land is definitely a part of the way towards the day of the Messiah.
Dr. Kedar, I think you've given people a lot to talk about. I don't want to take up too much of your time. I really, really appreciate it. Every time I talk to you, I want to call you Rav Kedar. I don't know why it comes out that way, but now I think I know why, because this really, to hear you put the historical perspective and say it's a miracle, and to show the emunah, the faith that you have in this, it's very, very inspiring. It's very powerful. I very much appreciate it. Thank you so much, Dr. Kedar. Just
Thank you
hold
so
on
much,
1 minute.
Eliyahu.